Hi, this is Amar Dhaliwal.
And Stephen Forth, and we're here from Ibbaka.
And we're here to talk about the recently published second annual survey on net revenue retention. So, Stephen, why don't we just go ahead and jump in and maybe for people who are coming across the report for the first time, how about just maybe provide the context in terms of why we chose to focus on net revenue retention, NRR, and why we found it sufficiently interesting to actually do our second survey on this.
So this is really customer driven. So about 2.5, 3 years ago, we started to get more and more requests from companies to help them redesign their packaging and pricing and move to value-based selling in order to improve net revenue retention. And they said that their investors, especially in their boards, were asking more and more about net revenue retention, and that it was front of mind. So as we work with a number of private equity and venture capital companies, we went out and we talked to the principals at those companies about why this was, why they were so concerned with net revenue retention and churn and expansion revenue, and what was really behind this and driving this. And we had some very good conversations on this together with Peakspan, which is a venture capital firm in the Bay Area. And Peakspan asked us to do some master classes on net revenue retention. And as we were doing this, we did a lot of research, and we found that the research available was not specific enough. It was all very high level, and at the most it would give an NRR number or maybe a churn number for companies of different sizes. But as we know, different SaaS verticals can have very different characteristics.
Right.
Ed tech does not behave in the same way as cyber tech. And MarTech and FinTech have very different characteristics. So we felt there was a need for deeper data. And the other thing we discovered, once we got really into the intersection of packaging and value and net revenue retention, was that if you're only focusing on that top level NRR number, you don't have the information that you need to make decisions. So together with Peakspan, we designed a survey. And we did our first survey last year, and we felt that we got really deep and interesting insights. So we picked it up again this year and took it to the next step.
Perfect. And you and I over the years have had to report a set of SaaS metrics either to our respective boards or to our respective investors, and NRR, along with ARR and ACV and CAC and all those other SaaS metrics, of course. How relevant or important, Stephen, is NRR today? Does it still carry the importance that we've had to deal with over the years?
Yeah, I think it's growing in importance. And the reason for that is it's gotten more and more difficult and expensive to win new customers. So the key to success has often been in expansion revenue.
Right.
To the extent that people now are talking about a new metric, PER, potential expansion revenue. So what is the total expansion revenue within your existing customer base, and how much of that are you capturing? So it's becoming, I think, more and more important to manage to. And when we talk about this year's results, we're seeing some quite astonishing phenomena in the results this year.
Right. So, and it's one of the things that stood out when I looked at the report. So just as you were talking there about expansion revenue, one of the things that I think you may just be alluding to there is that the report identified a trend of companies that have high churn but even higher expansion revenue, which results in strong NRR, and it's something that that we really haven't seen before. So maybe you could just spend a few minutes explaining, just your thoughts on why we're seeing this pattern.
Yeah, so just some thoughts on the pattern first. I think conventionally, and I was certainly in this camp, we thought the first thing you deal with is churn. So every SaaS vertical has sort of a natural level of churn, and you want to get your churn as close as possible to that level as you can, and that's your first priority. And when people come to Ibbaka, that's one of the things they ask us: how can we redesign our packaging and pricing and our value communication to reduce churn? And we've done a lot of work in that area. And the logic here is that you can only grow the revenue with customers you keep. So if you lose a customer, you can't, there's no expansion revenue from that customer. So that was the logic, and I still believe that logic. But the numbers this year, in some cases were very different. So here's an example of the company with the best NRR, and churn here is 10%. So I think most companies, in most cases, 10% churn would be a red flag. It would be a cause for concern.
Right.
And this is just the company with the best net revenue retention. There are more extreme examples that that we could show you, from the survey data itself. But what seems to be happening here is there are some companies that are casting a wide net, and they're bringing in lots of different customers, and then they are letting the customers that are not getting a lot of value churn, and then growing the customers that are getting a lot of value very aggressively. And if you peel back the data another layer, you see that the companies that have this pattern tend to have, they are either in areas like generative AI, so they are pure AI companies, or they're using pricing metrics that are closely associated with generative AI, such as input tokens, output tokens, number of models, and so on. There are a set of pricing metrics that are associated with generative AI, and all of the companies with this pattern, this pattern of relatively high churn, but blowing it through the roof in terms of expansion revenue, they come from this emerging generative AI related space.
Interesting. So for that one trend, what advice do you have for the leaders of these SaaS companies in terms of either being aware of that trend or riding that trend?
So I think the first thing is you need to be aware of it, and then start looking for it to see if it characterizes a subset of your customers. And there's a real danger in just looking at average numbers. So one of the critical things when it comes to NRR management is to segment your customers according to the different NRR factors, because averages averages are deceiving.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes sense as soon as you say it.
Yeah, so that's the first thing I would do, and see if this pattern exists for my company or in some subset of my company. The next question is, and what you're looking for are companies with higher than median churn, and higher than median expansion revenue. And then I would dig in and look at how are they using our applications? What part is driving the expansion revenue? Because expansion revenue can come from different things, right? It can come, if you have a good, better, best tiered model, it can come from upsell across packages. If you have a more of a modular architecture, it can come from cross-sell. And if you have designed your pricing so that you have some form of usage metric or outcome metric, it can come from growth in package. So you need to take that step and go further into the data and say, what is driving the expansion revenue at these companies?
Interesting. Yeah, I need to think about that one a little bit. I just need to. like whether there's any cause and effect type loop there. I'm gonna that's one of the things that from the report was something that I personally want to dig into a little bit more. Okay, I thought we did very well by going at least 10 minutes without talking about generative AI, but you mentioned the words. So how, I mean, obviously it's the question of the moment. How does Gen AI influence NRR? And what do people do about it?
Yeah, so that's just another slide that I wanted to go to. Okay, I can't find exactly the slide I was looking for, but to answer your question, so the first thing is, how do we tell if a company is a generative AI company?
Hmm.
And an oversight on our part, we didn't really go deep into that in this survey, and we have another survey that will start at the beginning of November, which is our annual survey into the monetization of generative AI. So this survey is not the perfect instrument to answer that question, Amar.
Okay.
But having said that, I think that we can see some insights. So one of the things that we did is we took some of Ibbaka's software and we clustered the survey responses using the Leiden clustering algorithm. And I also looked at k-means clustering as well, but I ended up using Leiden. And Leiden is an algorithm that is used in advanced data analysis to find clusters in data. And we found that there were, in fact, 3 clusters in the data. And actually, I just want to get to a better slide to show this. Sorry, I should have gone here directly. Yeah, here we go. So we found that there were 3 clusters. So there was one cluster that we called the conventional companies. And these were companies that are using primarily per user pricing. They're not using very much hybrid pricing. Their packaging pattern tended towards good, better, best, or tiered packaging. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the, in terms of organizational terms, a lot of the responsibility for net revenue retention was with the sales team, or in some cases, customer success. Mm-hmm. And these are the companies that are performing the worst. Okay. So then there was another group that we characterized as the enterprise cluster. And these companies tended to be larger, have larger average contract values, be very dependent on sales-led growth. So they're not the product-led growth companies. They're the sales-led growth companies selling to enterprise. They had lower churn. They had higher expansion revenue. And their pricing metrics tended to be hybrid. So they did use per-user pricing in many cases, but they combined that with other pricing metrics, either a usage metric, a value metric, measures of process complexity, and so on. So last year, this is the group that would have, the cluster, and we found this cluster last year as well. Last year, this is the cluster that would have had most of the high-performing companies in it.
Okay.
This year was fundamentally different. This year, there was this confusing cluster, which we called emergent. And these companies, this is where the AI companies and the companies that we think are using generative AI based on their pricing metrics, this is where the companies with this strange pattern of high churn and high expansion revenue, they're all in this third cluster. And there's a number of things to note about this cluster. One is, if you look at the distribution of churn and of expansion revenue, it's bimodal. So there's a bunch of companies that are underperforming, and there's a bunch of customers that are knocking it out of the park. So the averages here are deceptive. And in fact, if we just taken the companies that were doing really well, this cluster would be even more strikingly different and more strikingly outperforming. But there's a lot more noise in this cluster. So, another thing that we noticed is that the companies that have a dedicated team, so not relying on sales, not relying on customer success, but have a dedicated team whose job it is to grow expansion revenue, they were doing incredibly well. So organizational design has a significant impact.
Sorry, let me just dig into that a little bit. So what the results showed. So typically we would expect to see, and I think that you and I have seen over the years, a new sales team, then somebody responsible for, maybe let's call it account management, existing customers, and then of course the customer success function. And what we're saying is that we have seen emerging a new function or a new role within the organization that is only focused on expansion revenues. So different than traditional account management, different than traditional customer success.
Yeah, and okay, that's associated with the best NRR performance. And then
okay, so if there is for SaaS leaders, that's a very strong finding from this, is that the companies with stronger NRR performance are companies that have this or have organized around this new principle of a team focused on expansion revenue. Yeah. Okay.
I think as soon as you're at a scale where this makes sense, and as soon as you've got the other pieces in place, I mean, you have to have a packaging and pricing model that allows for expansion revenue.
Right.
So you need to get some of the foundation pieces in place. You need to understand, by adding, what functionality, how that impacts the value that you're creating.
Mm-hmm.
There's homework and the foundation to be built. But once you have that, you can put in place a team whose job it is and who gets rewarded for expanding expansion revenue. They don't get penalized for churn. They're not just focused on renewals. They're focused on growing inside the customer. And if you have the right pricing metrics, that this can have a huge impact.
Understood.
On performance.
Understood. Okay. Interesting. So, so we've spoken about the impact that generative AI is having on ARR, and then the results talking about this new function, this dedicated expansion function. Now the report also, which not a surprise, but the report also discusses the importance of pricing strategy in improving NRR. You just alluded to that in your conversations about pricing and packaging to support expansion. Does the data provide any insights into what are the most effective pricing strategies that have been adopted by companies that have overperformed?
So the answer is a cautious yes, and companies that use outcomes-based pricing outperform all other companies by a large margin. So examples of this would be Intercom with the way that it's priced, its Fin agent, pricing per resolution. Companies that sell automated lead generation, where you only get paid if you generate a conversation. So outcome-based pricing is by far the most impactful pricing. However, we know that it's also not always practical. So, if you can get to outcome-based pricing, you're going to want to do that as fast as you can. And the companies that are able to adopt outcome-based pricing or results-based pricing are going to win. Having said that, however, that's not applicable to all sectors. So I think the other thing I would say is, you need to have more than one tool. If you only have one pricing metric,
yeah,
it's going to be hard to optimize. You really see that with user-based pricing. And as you know, Amar, there's been a lot of conversations about, well, if generative AI is going to reduce the number of users, user-based pricing is a really bad way to price.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yep. And I'm not sure. And I'm not sure whether that penny has dropped just yet. And it will be interesting. I think this will be the year when that conversation will be a conversation had in many boardrooms and in many strategy meetings across every SaaS company.